Hello and welcome to step 4 of this tutorial on how to create a WhatsApp clone using Ionic2 and Meteor. In this step we'll add the messages view and the ability to send messages. Let's start by navigating to the chats component. We'll start by importing the messages page, which we'll soon implement, and we'll import the navigation controller provided to us by Ionic. The navigation controller is Ionic's new method to navigate in our app. We can also use a traditional router, but since in a mobile app we have no access to the URL bar, this might come more in handy. Let's inject it in the constructor and implement the showMessages method. We'll also need to register an event in the view, so once we click on a chat item, we'll be promoted to the messages page. In the chats view template, add the following event. Let's go ahead and implement the messages page. To implement a new page, simply create a new directory. In this case, we're going to call it messages, and inside we're going to create its component. We need to have some data about the messages and iterate through it. We'll define a cursor in the component, but instead of fetching the entire data in the collection, we will only find the messages correlated with the current chat using a simple query. Also, we'll need to determine whenever a message is ours or the receiver's. As for now, we're going to do it based on the message parity. If it's even, it's going to be ours. Else, it's going to be the receiver's. The basic component should look like so. As you can see, in order to get the chat's ID, we use the navigation parameters. This is a simple service which gives you an access to a key value storage containing all the parameters we've passed using the navigation controller. So if we look at the chats component, once we navigated to the messages page, we provided it with the current chat. And using the navigation parameters, we fetched it. Also, we've added an ownership property to the message model during transformation. It requires us to update the model declaration. Simply add the ownership field to the message model. Let's create the messages page view template. We'll simply create a new HTML file. Inside we'll place the following piece of code. We'd also like to provide it with a style sheet. Simply create an SCSS file. Inside this file, place the following style sheet. Whenever we add a new style sheet, it requires us to import it. In the app core SCSS file, simply add the following importation. This style sheet requires us to download some assets. Let's define an assets directory in the www directory. Simply create a new directory called assets and navigate to the assets directory we just created in the terminal. And inside we'll be downloading 3 files. First we'll download an image representing messages we send. Then we'll download an image representing a message the other person we are talking with sends. And finally we're going to download the background for the messages page. These assets are also available in the official repository. Links are in the description. Now let's test our application and see how the messages page looks like. We'll first start the Ionic server. And in a new tab, we'll start the Meteor server. Now that both servers are ready, let's log into our application. And once we click on a chat item, will be promoted to the messages page. As for now, it works, but the messages timestamp appears on a very messy format, which causes our view to break. To make it look decent, we'll use the date format. Let's start by importing the date format pipe in the messages component. Again, we'll be using Angular-2 moment. And once we import the pipe, we also need to provide it. Now let's use it in the view. As you can see, we provided the layout for the format. H stands for hour and M stands for minute. So we're gonna see the hour and the minute this message was sent. Let's see how a message looks like after our changes. So our messages are set, but there's still one really important feature missing, and that's sending a message. Let's implement our message editor. We'll start with the view itself. We'll add an input for editing our messages, a send button, and a record button whose logic won't be implemented since we only want to focus on the text messaging system. So let's navigate to the messages view. And add a new toolbar, which will represent our message editor inside the page's footer. Let's add some style to the message editor we've just created. Before we go ahead and implement the logic in the component, we need to implement a method which will add messages to our messages collection and run on both client's local cache and the server. Therefore, we're going to create a new file in our server called methods. And the first method it's going to contain is the addMessage method. And now since we want it to run on the client as well, we need to import it so it can be a part of our bundle. All we got to do is simply import it in the app file. We'd also like to validate some data sent to methods we define. For this, we're going to use a utility package provided to us by Meteor, and it's called check. Let's add it to the server. So inside the terminal, create a new tab. And inside the server, type Meteor add check. Let's use it in the addMessage method we've just created. Here we simply check that the parameters provided to us in the addMessage method are not an empty string. Once they are, an error is going to be thrown. The check package is already included in the Meteor client-side package, and therefore there's no need to install it again. Now that our method handler is finally ready, we can go ahead and update our messages component. We'd like to store a message for the message editor, and we'd like to implement the sendMessage method. In addition, we'd like this method to be called whenever we press the return button. Let's see how the messages page is functioning so far. As you can see, we have a message editor, and once we use it, we can send messages. However, there's only one problem. Once we exceed the size of the screen, it's not going to scroll by itself. For this, we're going to implement an autoscroller. So let's go back to the messages component. And inside we'll define the autoscroller. The autoscroller will be an instance of the mutation observer. The mutation observer is a native object provided to us by the JavaScript environment and is used to detect changes in the view. So we'd like to initiate the autoscroller once the view is ready, and once the view is destroyed, we're going to stop it. To run callbacks on destroy and on initialization, we're going to import two interfaces. And using TypeScript, we can implement these interfaces. It means that once these methods are not implemented, then the compiler is going to throw an error. So on initialization, we'd also like to initialize the autoscroller, and on destroy, we'd also like to stop the autoscroller. Let's implement the autoscroll function, which will initialize the autoscroller. So what it means, whenever there was a change in the messages list in the view, then we're going to scroll down using the scroll down method. Let's implement this method. As you can probably see, these methods rely on some DOM elements like messages editor and messages list. These can actually be implemented using simple getters and query selectors. Let's make these DOM elements available to us by defining the following getters. And let's test the autoscroller in our app. And let's see if the autoscroller actually works. As you can see, whenever we add a new message, the screen will stay at the bottom. So this is all for the current step. Hope you liked it, and see you in the next one.